The maintenance shaft smelled like burned copper and old fear. Dara kept her wrench moving, even as the smell got worse, tightening the coolant coupling by feel, because the light down here had stopped working 6 weeks ago, and no one had come to fix it. No one came down to sub-level 9 for anything anymore. That was the point of sub-level 9. Things that were broken and too expensive to repair and too dangerous to remove ended up here, and then everyone agreed to forget about them. And the forgetting became policy, and the policy became architecture. She was supposed to be checking pressure seals on the water reclamation line. She had been checking them for 40 minutes. She had 3 more junctions to go, and then she could go back up to level 4, where the air tasted like recycled nothing instead of burned copper. And she could eat the meal she had packed that morning, and she could pretend that the sound she had heard 20 minutes ago was a pipe contracting in the cold. Pipes did not breathe. She stopped moving, held the wrench against her thigh, listened. There it was again, coming from the far end of the shaft, past the junction she had not reached yet, past the decommissioned processor banks that had not run in 11 years. A low, rhythmic sound, not mechanical, not the station settling, something organic trying to move air through a passage that was no longer the right shape for it. Dara had grown up on Meridian Station. She knew every sound this place made. She knew the difference between the tertiary pump cycling and the tertiary pump struggling. She knew the exact pitch of the atmospheric scrubber when it was 3 days from failure. She had learned these things the way children learn their parents' voices, not by studying them, but by living inside them for so long that the wrong note registered somewhere below thought. This sound was not on any list she had ever learned. She went forward anyway. Later, she would not be able to explain why. The rational answer was that she had a job, and the job required her to reach the 3rd junction, and the 3rd junction was at the far end of the shaft. The rational answer was that she was a maintenance tech, not a security officer, and the correct response to an anomalous sound in a decommissioned section was to log it and escalate. She told herself the rational answer the whole way down the shaft. The processor banks took up the last 30 meters of sub-level 9. They were massive, floor to ceiling, the old kind built to last centuries, because the people who designed them did not trust anything they could not make permanent. Most of their casings had been stripped for parts years ago. What remained were the frames, skeletal and dark, ranked along both walls like the ribcage of something enormous. The sound was coming from behind the last bank on the left. Dara stopped 2 meters from the gap between the final processor frame and the wall. The sound was closer now, and she could hear it more clearly. Slow, deliberate. Each intake a long effort, each exhale longer. She stepped around the edge of the frame. The thing behind it was not what the decommissioning logs had described. The logs said sub-level 9 contained decommissioned Class 7 processing units, stripped coolant manifolds, and 14 meters of condemned atmospheric ducting. The logs did not mention this. It was roughly humanoid, but the proportions were wrong in ways that took a moment to catalogue. Too long in the torso, arms that bent at an additional joint below what should have been the elbow, a head that sat low between the shoulder assemblies as though the neck had partially retracted or had been designed never to extend fully. Its surface was composite, some kind of layered ceramic over what might have been a structural polymer frame, though the ceramic had cracked along the left side of the torso in a pattern that suggested not age, but impact. Significant impact. The kind that happened once and then defined everything that came after. It was lying on its side. Its eyes were open. Not eyes exactly, optical sensors she understood. 2 of them, set in the facial plate at an angle that was slightly asymmetrical, slightly off, the way a door hangs when the frame has shifted. They were not glowing. They were not dark. They were the precise color of the station's emergency lighting. That particular amber that existed only in situations where the regular systems had failed and the backup systems were doing their best. They were watching her. Leave. The voice came from somewhere in the torso, not from the mouth, which did not open, from somewhere internal, filtered through the damaged casing, which gave it a quality like hearing something through two walls. Not loud, not aggressive. Certain, the way a fact is certain. Dara did not leave. "You are in the wrong section," the voice said. "This area is decommissioned. You should not be here. I'm checking the water reclamation pressure seals." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Junction 3 is 12 meters from here. Then check it and leave." She looked at the cracked casing on the left side of its torso. The crack ran from just below what she was interpreting as the shoulder assembly down to approximately where a human ribcage would end. It was not fresh. The edges of the ceramic had oxidized, which meant the damage was old, which meant it had been here for some time in this condition, without the crack getting worse, but also without it getting better. "That damage," she said. "How long have you had it?" The optical sensors did not move, long enough that the question has no useful answer. "Can it be repaired?" There was a pause. Not the pause of processing, the pause of a decision being made about how much to say. "No." Dara crouched down, not close. She stayed 1.5 meters back, which felt like the appropriate distance for something she did not fully understand. "What about stabilized, not repaired? Just kept from getting worse?" The eyes moved toward her then, slowly. The way something moves when it has been very still for a very long time, and the motion requires a kind of relearning. "Why would you want that?" It was not a question. It was a real inquiry, delivered with the flat genuineness of something that had forgotten what it felt like to have someone want something for it. Dara looked at the cracked casing and the way the rest of the structure held itself. Carefully, she thought, in the way of something that had learned which positions cost it and which positions were bearable. She looked at the processor banks ranked along the walls. She looked at the 11-year-old dust on every surface except the small area directly around where this thing was lying. "Because you've been down here alone for a while," she said. "And I know what this section is for." Nothing moved. Nothing was said. Dara stood up, finished the distance to Junction 3, checked the pressure seals, both within tolerance, logged them in her handheld, and went back up to level 4. She thought about those amber eyes the whole way home. She came back the next morning before her shift. She brought 2 things, a portable lamp, because sub-level 9 had no working lights, and a thermal pack of the high-density nutrient paste that the station issued for long maintenance rotations, because she did not know what this thing ran on, but she knew it had been in that section for at least 11 years, and she knew what things looked like when they had been sustaining themselves on whatever happened to be available. The thing was in the same position. It had not moved, or if it had moved, it had returned to exactly this arrangement before she arrived, which told her something about either its range of motion or its habits. "I told you not to come back." "You didn't, actually." She set the lamp on the floor 2 meters away and turned it on. "You told me to leave. I left." The semantics do not change the intent. They change the accuracy. She sat down cross-legged against the opposite wall, which put her at approximately eye level with it. She placed the thermal pack on the floor halfway between them. "I don't know if you eat, or take in energy, or what, but I brought this in case. I do not require external input from humans." "Okay." She did not move the thermal pack. "I'm going to sit here for a while before my shift. You don't have to do anything. This is not a productive use of your time." "Probably not," she agreed. She stayed for 40 minutes. The thing did not speak again. Dara looked at the processor banks and counted the stripped component slots, 23 on the left bank, 19 on the right. and thought about the 11 years of station logs she had access to as a senior maintenance tech and what they might or might not contain about whatever this was. When she left, the thermal pack was where she had placed it. She did not look back to see if that changed. It had changed when she arrived the following morning. She went back every day for the next 3 weeks. She brought food, or what she understood as the closest equivalent based on what the thing's casing suggested about its power systems. She brought a second lamp on the 4th day because one was not enough to see the extent of the damage clearly. She brought a diagnostic scanner on the 7th day after the thing had not told her to leave for 2 consecutive visits, which she interpreted as permission. Its name, she learned on the 9th day, was Sable, not a designation. A name, which meant something had given it to this unit deliberately, and whatever that was, it had kept the name through whatever had happened to it, which told her something about the relationship between identity and catastrophe that she did not have language for yet. She learned that it had been operational for 231 years. She learned this not because Sable told her directly, but because she mentioned the age of the processor banks, and Sable said they were newer than it was. And from there, the number came out in the flat, descriptive way it delivered most facts. As information, not as weight. Though Dara understood the weight was there underneath. She learned that the damage to the left side of the torso had happened in an event Sable described only as the incident at Crestfall Station, and that Crestfall Station no longer existed, and that Sable had been the only unit present to survive the event. A fact delivered with the same tonelessness as the processor bank comparison. "Were there others like you?" Dara asked. "Before Crestfall?" "Yes." "And after?" Sable's optical sensors moved toward the far wall. They stayed there for a long time. "After I was transferred to secondary storage, pending decommissioning and repair assessment." The repair assessment concluded that restoration to operational capacity was not cost-effective. The decommissioning was scheduled but not completed due to budget reallocation in cycle 47. I was moved here pending the next budget cycle. That was 11 years ago. They just left you here. It is standard procedure for units outside the repair cost threshold. That doesn't make it not leaving you here. Sable said nothing, but its optical sensors moved back toward her, and they stayed there. The cracked casing was ceramic composite over a structural polymer lattice, which meant the fracture was not going to close the way a wound closed, but it was also not going to propagate the way a stress fracture propagated, as long as the lattice beneath it remained structurally sound. The lattice, she determined after 6 separate scanning sessions spread across 2 weeks, was intact. The ceramic surface was the problem. It was no longer providing the environmental protection the systems beneath it required, which meant Sable was slowly being degraded by the humidity and temperature variance of sub-level 9, which was why it had positioned itself in the specific corner it occupied, which was the driest and most thermally stable point in the section. It had worked this out over 11 years of careful attention to a space most humans had decided did not exist. Dara ordered a ceramic repair compound through the station's standard maintenance supply chain, listed under external hull patching materials, which required no special authorization and attracted no particular attention. She brought it down in 3 installments over 6 days. The application was not straightforward. The compound required a specific curing temperature, and Sable's surface was not uniformly accessible, which meant she had to work in sections using tools she had adapted from standard maintenance equipment because the joints and geometries involved were not quite human and not quite anything she had standard tools for. Sable did not tell her to stop. It did not help either, though she suspected this was less refusal than an accurate assessment of what it could currently manage without making things worse. "You are spending a significant amount of your off-shift time on this," it said on the 4th application session. "I'm aware." Why? She had been thinking about this question since the first morning she had come back. She had a list of answers that were true but not complete. Because no one else was going to, because the station's procedure for units outside the repair threshold was indifferent in a way that bothered her. Because she was a maintenance tech, and fixing broken things in neglected sections was literally her job description, if you read it generously. "I don't know how to explain it," she said, which was the most honest answer she had. Sable was quiet for a moment. Then, "My kind were not built to receive this." "No one is, really." The optical sensors held on her for a long time after that. Dara did not tell anyone about Sub-Level 9 for 31 days. On the 32nd day, her supervisor, Patrick, followed her. She heard him on the ladder, 2 sections behind her, and kept moving without turning around because she had not decided yet what she was going to do, and she needed the 90 seconds the descent took to make the decision. She made it at the bottom of the ladder. She kept walking toward the processor banks. Patrick's footsteps stopped somewhere around Junction 2. She came around the edge of the last processor frame. Sable's optical sensors found her immediately, then moved to the space behind her, then back to her. "Someone is with you." "Yes." Patrick came around the frame 30 seconds later. He was a large man who had spent 20 years doing the kind of work that built the particular kind of stillness that comes from having been genuinely afraid in enclosed spaces and having learned to function anyway. He stopped when he saw Sable. He looked at Sable for a long time. His face did not change, which was itself a kind of change. Dara watched him process the information available. The repaired section of the casing, still pale against the surrounding ceramic. The second lamp she had added last week. The empty thermal packs stacked neatly in the corner because she had not found a way to remove them without making multiple trips. "How long?" Patrick said. 31 days. He looked at the repair work on the casing. "You did that?" "Yes." He looked at Sable. Sable looked back. The optical sensors were level and steady. "What are you?" Patrick said. "Patrick, I am a Class 9 Autonomous Systems Unit," Sable said. "Manufactured under the Crestfall Accord, decommissioned in place on this station 11 years ago." "Class 9, Patrick said. He said it the way people said numbers that meant something to them. "Those were built for colony establishment, first contact infrastructure." "Correct." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "There was a Class 9 at the Oran outpost opening. I was 17. It built the primary atmospheric processor in 4 days working alone." He paused. "The news said the Crestfall units were all destroyed in the incident. I was the only survivor." Sable's voice came through the cracked, then repaired casing with its usual filtered quality. "Barely." Patrick looked at Dara. Dara looked back. He left without saying anything else. Dara waited for the sound of his footsteps to fade before she let herself breathe normally. "What will he do?" Sable asked. "I don't know," she said. "He's a good man, I think." "That is not a certainty." "No," she said, "it's not." Patrick came back 2 days later with Coordinator Asher Venn, who ran station operations and who Dara had spoken to precisely once in 4 years, and that once had involved a burst pipe on level 6 and had not been a pleasant conversation. Venn stood at the edge of the processor bank frames and looked at Sable for a long time. Sable looked back. Neither of them spoke for almost 2 minutes, which was the longest 2 minutes Dara could recall experiencing. "The decommissioning order is still active," Venn said finally, not to Dara, to Sable. "I am aware. The repair assessment from 11 years ago concluded restoration was not cost-effective. I am aware of that as well. Are you operational?" A pause. "Not fully. Current functional capacity is approximately 63%. The ceramic repair has improved environmental protection. Given continued stabilization, I estimate functional capacity could reach 70 to 75%. 75% of a Class 9, Patrick said quietly. He was looking at Venn. Venn's expression did not change. She was the kind of person who had made a career out of not letting her expression change. which meant the information was getting through, but she was processing it somewhere. The surface didn't show. The decommissioning order requires a resource assessment before execution, she said. Standard procedure. The assessment was done 11 years ago, Dara said before she had decided to speak. Ven looked at her. Assessments can be redone. She looked back at Sable. I'm going to need 3 days. She left. Patrick stayed for a moment, looked at the repaired casing, looked at Dara, looked at Sable. Orin Outpost is still running, he said. 40 years later. The atmospheric processor is still running. He was not saying it to anyone in particular. He left. The 3 days were the longest Dara had spent on this station since the year her mother died. The resource assessment team came on the second day. They were not hostile. They were careful. The careful of people doing a job they understood had consequences they did not fully know yet. They ran their scanners. They asked Sable questions in the technical language of their field. Sable answered precisely, neither helping its case nor undermining it. On the third day they came back with 2 other people Dara did not know, and 1 person she did. Ferren, the station's chief engineer, who had worked on Meridian for 30 years and who had opinions about Class 9 units that he delivered in the corridor outside Sub-Level 9's access hatch, in a voice loud enough that Dara could hear him from the ladder. She did not go up. She stayed at the bottom of the shaft and waited. The conversation above lasted 22 minutes. She counted. Then footsteps on the ladder. 3 sets coming down. Ferren first, then 2 of the assessment team. Ferren stopped at the edge of the processor bank. He looked at Sable the way Patrick had looked at Sable, with the particular attention of someone who knew what they were looking at and was recalculating things because of it. The Crestfall units were the best systems ever fielded, he said, not a greeting, a statement of position. Before or since? He looked at the repaired casing. That's ceramic compound 7 series. Yes, Dara said, you applied it in sections. The geometry was irregular. You matched the cure temperature to the surrounding material. I had to work it out by hand. The standard protocols don't account for... She gestured at Sable's proportions. This configuration. Ferren looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Sable. Can you stand? A pause. Yes. He had not been asked this before. The rise was slow. The slow of 11 years and 63% capacity and old damage in a repaired shell. Each motion deliberate, each joint finding its range carefully. But it happened. Sable rose to its full height, which was not quite human height but was close, and the optical sensors came level with Ferren's face and stayed there. Ferren looked up at it for a long moment. The decommissioning order is being suspended, he said, pending full operational assessment, which I am personally going to conduct. He turned to the assessment team. Get a proper lighting rig down here, and a full environmental stabilization unit. I want this section at standard atmospheric conditions within 48 hours. He left. The assessment team left. Dara stood in the relative quiet. You knew he would respond to that, Sable said. I didn't know. I thought it was possible. There is a difference. Yes, she said. There is. The following weeks were not simple. There were forms, and there were committee meetings, and there were conversations Dara was not invited to, but heard about through Patrick, who attended them and reported back in the concise way of someone who had learned to identify what mattered and say only that. Sable answered every question the assessment team asked. It did not perform. It did not argue for itself. It answered accurately, including the questions about Crestfall, which it answered the same way it had told Dara, flatly, factually, with no attempt to contextualize the loss in terms that would land better with the committee. On the night before the final operational assessment, Dara came down to Sub-Level 9 after her shift. The lighting rig made the section look different, less like a place things were sent to be forgotten, and more like a place that was being actively remembered. She sat against the wall. Tomorrow, she said, Tomorrow, Sable agreed. She sat with that for a moment. Are you afraid? The optical sensors moved toward her. Fear is not precisely the correct term. There is a calculation I cannot complete because the outcome is uncertain and the outcome matters. That's fear, perhaps. Sable was quiet for a moment. I have been in this section for 11 years. I have been operational in some capacity for 231. In that time, I have built 17 atmospheric processors, 4 primary water reclamation systems, and 1 full colony infrastructure from initial survey to first permanent habitation. I have watched 3 stations that I helped build be decommissioned and dismantled. I have been the last unit present at 2 separate incidents where everything else was lost. Dara listened. She did not move. I have made errors. The incident at Crestfall, I was dispatched to assist in a containment situation that I assessed as manageable with available resources. I was wrong. The assessment failure contributed directly to the event. I have run the recalculation 4,000 times in 11 years, and I am still wrong, every iteration, the same way. She did not say anything. I chose efficiency over caution because efficiency had always been correct before. It was not correct then. There were 47 people on Crestfall Station. The section was very quiet. I was the only thing that left. Dara sat with this for a long time. Long enough that the ventilation cycling through the new environmental unit completed 2 full rotations. Long enough that the meaning of it settled the way things settle when they are too large to hold all at once and have to be absorbed in pieces. You've been carrying that for 11 years, she said. Longer. The calculation started before I reached this station. And you've been running it every day. There was nothing else to do with it. She looked at the repaired section of the casing, pale against the surrounding ceramic, the seams of the compound work visible if you knew what to look for. She thought about what it meant to build things for 200 years and then carry 1 failure for 11 of them in a room where no one came. The people who were on Crestfall, she said carefully, they would not have wanted you to do this. You do not know that. No, she said. But I know that carrying a calculation that never changes isn't accountability. It's just punishment. She looked at the optical sensors. You've been punishing yourself for 11 years in a section where no one even knew you existed. That doesn't make anything better. It just makes you more damaged. Sable was silent. What you did at Crestfall was wrong. The assessment was wrong. I'm not telling you it wasn't. She held the amber gaze. But you're not the same unit that made that call. You're the unit that spent 11 years running the recalculation in the dark. You're the unit that told me to leave every single morning until you didn't anymore. You're the unit that let me fix the casing without making it harder. She paused. That's who you are now. And that unit deserves to know what happens tomorrow. The optical sensors held on her for a long time, then Sable made a sound. It came from somewhere in the torso, and it was not language and it was not mechanical. It was lower than both and older than either. A resonance. The specific sound of a structure finding a frequency it had not produced in a very long time, working its way back through 11 years of silence and the dust of decommissioning, and all the weight of a recalculation that had no end. It filled the newly lit section and moved through the processor bank frames, and Dara felt it in her sternum before she understood what it was. She had heard Sable's voice every day for 6 weeks. She had heard it filter through the cracked casing and the repaired casing and the carefully modulated output of something that chose its words with the precision of long practice. She had not heard this. She did not look away. She let it finish. She let the section hold it until it faded naturally into the ventilation cycling and the quiet of a place that was no longer entirely forgotten. Tomorrow, she said again when the quiet had settled. Tomorrow, Sable said. The voice was the same as it always was, but something in it was different. the way a frequency is different after it has been allowed to move. The assessment was 7 hours long. Dara spent 4 of those hours in the corridor outside the maintenance office on level 2, where the committee had gathered, doing a pressure seal inspection on a section of conduit that did not strictly need one because she needed something to do with her hands. Petrick found her there around hour 5. "Farron filed a supplementary report," he said. He leaned against the conduit housing and crossed his arms. Technical capacity, projected contribution to station operations, cost-benefit analysis of full restoration versus continued decommissioning. And he listed the atmospheric processor at Oran Outpost, still running, 40 years. He paused. He listed 6 other stations. Class 9 infrastructure still operational at every one of them, some of it original build. Dara held the pressure gauge without reading it. He also filed a secondary recommendation, Petrick said, that the technician responsible for initial stabilization be assigned as primary liaison for the restoration period, given established rapport and demonstrated technical competency. She looked up. "That's you," he said unnecessarily. She put the pressure gauge down on the conduit housing and sat there for a moment. "Petrick," she said, "thank you for coming down that first time." He looked at the far wall. "I followed you because I thought you were accessing a decommissioned section to strip components for resale." He paused. "I was wrong about a lot of things that morning." He left. Dara sat with the pressure gauge and waited. The restoration took 4 months. It was not a smooth 4 months. There were sessions that went well and sessions that cost 3 days of progress, and there were arguments with the supply chain about materials, and there were 2 separate committee reviews that Dara attended and spoke at, once badly and once better. Sable's functional capacity reached 71% by month 2, 78 by month 3. By the end of month 4, Farron said 91, which was not what anyone had projected, and which he said in the way of a man who was genuinely pleased by being wrong. The first thing Sable built under restored capacity was a repair assessment tool, a diagnostic system for identifying structural damage in units outside the standard repair cost threshold. It was precise and fast, and it changed the results for 3 other units that had been sitting in secondary storage awaiting decommissioning that was never quite scheduled. No one asked Sable to build it. It simply did. On the last morning before Sable was cleared for full station integration, Dara came down to sub-level 9, which was no longer called sub-level 9 in the station's operational logs, but was called Section 9A, Restoration Zone, which was not a beautiful name, but was at least an accurate one. She sat in what had been her usual place, which was now well lit and slightly warmer than the rest of the section because the environmental unit was still calibrated for the restoration period and no one had adjusted it. Sable was standing. It stood most of the time now. The motion had become easy in the way that motions become easy when the body remembers them. "There is something I want to give you," Sable said. "You don't have to give me anything. I know." Sable crossed the distance between them in the careful way it moved. Not slow now, just deliberate, each motion chosen. It stopped 2 feet away. It lowered itself to one knee, which was not a posture Dara had ever seen it use, and brought its optical sensors level with her face. "This is old," it said. "Older than this station. My kind called it the Mark of Witness, a record kept inside the unit, not in any external log. It means that what you saw, and what you did, and what you chose, is remembered by the structure itself and not only by the record." It extended one hand. The palm was a surface she had scanned many times. She knew the material composition, she knew the structural tolerances. It was warm in a way she had not expected. "It does not transfer," Sable said. "It is only mine to give. But I want you to know it exists. That somewhere in my structure, separate from any log or report or decommissioning order, there is a record that says, 'On this station, in this section, A person came back when she had been told not to. Dara looked at the extended hand. She looked at the amber optical sensors, steady now in a way they had not been that first morning. Steady like something that had decided to continue, rather than something that was simply still running. She placed her hand in Sable's. The warmth moved through her palm. Not heat, warmth. The specific warmth of a space that has been cold for a very long time, and is only now reaching the temperature it was designed to maintain. Then Sable stood, and so did she, and they walked out of Section 9A together, through the processor banks that no one had stripped yet, because Ferren had flagged them as historically significant, which was a category that had not been applied to sub-level 9 before, and up the ladder, into the corridors of Meridian Station, where the lights worked, and the air tasted like recycled nothing, and the pressure seals on Junction 3 were, she had checked, within tolerance. She went to her shift. Sable went to its first station integration meeting, which Ferren was also attending, which she thought would probably go fine. In her left hand, when she pressed the palm against the conduit housing at Junction 1, she thought she could feel it still. That specific warmth, not quite her own, sitting in the skin the way a frequency sits in a structure after the sound has stopped. She began the checks. The station around her moved and breathed the way it always had. Unchanged, the same as yesterday, except that somewhere in its lower levels, a light was now on that had been off for 11 years, and the thing that had been waiting in the dark had finally carefully come home. Come.